There are places in the world where the boundary that separates our reality from the next is strong, and none cross it but those who die when their souls return to their Maker. They do not return to tell us the tales of what lies just beyond our reach, and good thing, too, for such stories would be terrific, maddening, and surely more awesome than our minds can comprehend. But there are other places in the world for which this is not the case. In these places, the boundary between this world and the next is thin, or at least that is the explanation for how strange and wild things creep out of the shadows through rifts in the air or into the minds of men who have looked into the stars and found the faults within them. The city of Stagwall on the southern tip of the prime expanse is one such place. For every sailor, fisherman, beast hunter, and harpooner who sails the Mirrordeep waters, the strangeness of the world across the boundary is an all too familiar acquaintance. Stagwall sits on the continent's southern cliffs. Far below the great walls that ring the cliff edges, the haunting waters of the Mirrordeep crash and beat on the rock, a cacophonic, never-ending noise that drowns out all else along the shores. Further east, the cliffs slope down toward dark, black-sanded beaches, where no one walks alone and no one walks at night. To the west of Stagwall's cliffs, the terrain slopes down again, but gradually, and this is where the people of the city built the greatest ports and shipyards in the prime expanse. For the Mirrordeep is vast, stretching from one end of the horizon to the other, and none there be who have crossed it and returned. And so Stagwall builds its ships ever larger, adding another pair of guns, more launchers for harpoons, and the reinforced metal skeletons lie in their berths as wood from all over Zarathus is brought to find which is best for the task of mastering the ancient sea. While none have ever come back to port reporting land on the other side, many ships return to Stagwall's ports with precious cargo. Just as the ships of Harrowdeep Harbor return to Grimsby with their catches from the Sea of Shrouds in the north, so too do the fishermen from Stagwall provide the bounty of the southern Mirrordeep. But whereas the men of the north are beset by all manner of beasts and vermin, the southern ships do not sail out in fear. Every vessel that sails from Stagwall does so in hopes that it might return with nets full of more than just fish, crab, or casual foodstuffs. By the time the beasts that ascend from the depths to plague the sailors of Stagwall discover that their victims will not cower in terror, they have already been pummeled with cannonballs, stuck with harpoons, dragged aboard the vessel, and hacked to pieces that will be sold in the market, while their enchanted bones and organs find their way onto carts to travel west to the Mapleward Depot, where they can make a profit away from the eyes and ears of the wardens or their Fagar overseers. Of all the famous ships that sailed from Stagwall, it was the Deepwalker, captained by the aging Jarik Vale, that brought the most bounty in from the dark waters. A rough man who had worked his way from lowly dock worker to harbor master, from harbor master to sailor, and finally from sailor to captain of his own mighty vessel, Jarik Vale took pride in his ship. In his time, the Deepwalker was the largest vessel to sail from Stagwall's ports. So large it was, in fact, that only one newly constructed berth in port could house it. In due time, other larger ships were built, and the ports were enlarged with them, but in Jarik's day, the Deepwalker was the greatest of them, with its 40 long guns in the lower deck and 36 harpoon ballistas along the upper deck, its iron-reinforced hull, and its 2,000-square-foot sails. When the Deepwalker set out to hunt for its prize, no other vessel of man could deny it, and very few inhuman forces could either. The largest and weirdest beasts of the age were brought back by her captain and crew. They were the first to discover many strange and fascinating creatures, such as the mirror eels, long, slithery, snake-like things with no scales, but instead skin that flickers like polished glass. The lantern leviathan, a floppy creation the size of a whale but covered in buoyant glowing sacks of bioluminescent enchanted liquid that flawlessly mimics the stars overhead. The bonehook crabs, crustaceans the size of houses with curved claws which have killed many a hapless sailor by hooking him and drawing him into its beak to crack his skull like a walnut. The choir beak, massive squids with 12 tentacular arms whose vocalizations produce layered tones like that of a haunting choir that can echo for miles. And the only specimen ever encountered, of a glass-back colossus, a titanic beast giving off the appearance of a turtle with a translucent crystal shell through which its glowing, pulsing organs can be seen. These and more abominable curiosities the Deep Walker brought out of the dark Mirrordeep waters, dragging them back to Stagwall in return for great profit and fame. With each new haul, the docks became a veritable circus, priests arguing whether the catch was demonic or not, black market vendors fighting one another for the first to make an offer for unusual organs or bones, children squeezing through the crowds to poke at the dead squishy remains. When asked how he managed to come and go so easily and triumphantly when others failed, Jarik's crew told how their captain did not fear the open sea, for he could read it the way farmers read the wind across a field. Many a time Jarik had seen the signs before anyone else, and had turned his ship back so that they arrived in port only an hour before a great gale whipped up the Mirrordeep into a frenzy, dragging other ships down whose captains had failed to heed the sea's warnings. Eventually, Jarik became old, and his life of hard-won glory pulled him down into a chair from which he found it difficult to rise. In his final year upon the water, his stubborn will drove his body beyond its limits, and his leg was lost, not to a great monster of the water, but to an unsecured cannon sliding across the deck. Yet even this did not stop him from going out upon the water, and his crew became accustomed to the sound of his handmade, steam-powered metal prosthetic thudding along the deck and hissing as the steam mingled with the salty air. It was on the third autumn after Captain Jarik had lost his leg that winter came early. One night when the Deep Walker sat still in the water, the wind died away, and the Mirrordeep became an unbroken plane of glass, a perfect reflection of everything above. It was in moments like this that the veterans of the Mirrordeep knew to look away, for when the waters of that great deep become still, it is said that the stars seen upon its surface do not match the stars in the sky. Those who look into these foreign false constellations will find understanding fleeting from them within an hour of returning to the shore, and only putting out upon the water and leaving the land behind will interrupt their insanity. The people of Stagwall call this condition unmoored, and all who have ever been brought low by it have perished at sea. But Captain Jarik did not fear the false stars that night. Instead, he looked out over the expanse of black glass pierced by the heavenly arrangements whose names were not known to Zarathus. The crew whispered among themselves, at once both fearful and awestruck, for if any Stagwall captain could look into the false stars without being unmoored, it was Jarik Vale. Their fearless captain leaned over the rail and stared into the dark mirror, listening for what seemed like endless hours. Soon, all but a few of his most loyal crew had left him, returning to their duties, eyes cast upward to avoid glancing at the Mirrordeep's surface. The three crew that continued to watch and wait said that just before he left the rail, Captain Jarik spoke quietly toward the water. None heard what he said, but those who watched seemed to feel as though something of significance had just happened, though the specifics could not be guessed. Jarik returned upon the Deep Walker none the worse for wear, and his crew spoke not a word of what had happened until the next day, when the captain returned to the docks, no trace of the unmooring upon him whatsoever. After that, his crew openly marveled at their famous captain, the man who spoke to the sea and had not been driven out of his mind. Jarik accepted the praise with stoic silence, ever mindful of his role as the head of his ship. That spring, Aldena Vale, Jarik's patient wife of 49 years, passed away in her sleep while the Deep Walker was at sea. This blow struck him keener than any wound, and Jarik handed the captain's hat to his first mate, a frightening one-eyed woman named Risa Saltkeeper. The exploits of the Deep Walker continued, though with less legendary fare than before, for larger ships were being built by then, and it was no longer Jarik Vale in command of the mighty vessel. Profits remained for the ship and her crew, but the fame declined as newer tales came in from the Mirrordeep's adventurers. The old former captain was a presence on the docks for the rest of his days, often walking the edge both day and night, advising the sailors, christening new captains of other vessels, scoffing at those who had brought in larger prey than he had in his younger days. But he was not always complimentary. Once, when the crew of the Iron Harrow brought in a whole pod of brine howlers, Jarik roundly rebuked them, claiming that they had no right to take that many, and that there would one day be consequences for their greedy theft from the sea. When asked how he could be so sure of this, Jarik solemnly claimed that ever since that first night that he had spoken to the sea spoke back to him. At first, the crew of the Iron Harrow laughed, but after speaking to other sailors, including some of the crew of the Deep Stalker, they learned that Jarik's claim had more teeth than they had first thought. Their laughter faded altogether when Jarik took on a new habit. During the day, he took to sitting in the corner of the popular tavern, the Inky Cup, and offered his advice and expertise freely to all who would ask. It was this way that Captain Jarik transformed from famous captain into seafaring legend. He predicted storms with perfect accuracy, down to the spots where the lightning would strike. He would tell other captains when the wind would change, predict for crews of various outboard vessels their hauls for the day, which monsters they would catch, and which places of the Mirrordeep to avoid. Those who listened to his warnings saved their lives. Those who did not found misfortune and sometimes death. At night, Jarik walked along the docks, eyes half closed, listening to the waters, murmuring back words heard by no one else. Soon, every sailor, captain, dock worker, and harbor master in Stagwall sought out Captain Jarik's blessing before they set off, and the city papers published his predictions in their daily reports. Some crews refused to leave their berths until Jarik spoke to them on behalf of the sea. For 2 years, his guidance led to a prosperous and vibrant town, some even considering that Jarik might be a sign from the Creator that he was calling them back to himself. Fagar influence was no longer the butt of many jokes, but rather now a serious endeavor in the walls of the harbor town. But then, the strangeness came to Stagwall. On certain nights at the end of autumn, when the Mirrordeep lay too still, Jarik walked alone to the end of the longest pier and knelt, whispering into the dark water. The next morning, he suggested that certain ships delay their voyages while encouraging others to leave immediately. His advice had never been wrong before, and so every ship did as he bid. That night, Stagwall felt a sting of betrayal and confusion as every ship that set out early went down into the depths as a horrendous storm tore their boats apart. At first, the people of Stagwall believed that something had gone wrong. They had misunderstood or misinterpreted Captain Jarik's warnings. Perhaps the papers had failed to print them. Others claimed it was entirely natural. The Mirrordeep had always claimed ships. Why would it have changed because of one man? But the next day, 5 more ships went down in the dark. The storm was so powerful that it had to be unnatural. Angry widows swarmed the Inky Cup to confront Jarik about why he had not warned them. Jarik would only say that he had tried, but that no one was listening to him. Others argued back, accusing him of lying, but Jarik would not budge, and finally left the Inky Cup to stroll along the docks, fists in his pockets as his metal leg hissed and thudded across the wooden boards. The next day, as Jarik returned to his seat in the tavern and began to give the day's words from the sea, a young dock worker named Kellen, a boy no older than 10, burst into the establishment and hollered, "He conspires with the beasts!" Before others could throw him out, some had managed to get his story out of him. That night, he said, he had followed Jarik as the old captain walked the docks. The captain had casually strolled to the end of the longest pier in the harbor when the water was calm, just like it had been that one night when he had first spoken to the sea. The black glass reflected the lanterns in perfect stillness when Jarik knelt at the end of the pier and whispered down into the Mirrordeep. When he did, said Kellen, the clear, unbroken surface had been disturbed by something truly huge, something from far down that spoke back to him in a hideous whisper that had terrified Kellen. He had not understood the sound, for it was not the language of men, but the huge thing turned and slowly sloshed its way from the harbor and back out into the Mirrordeep's dark abyss. When it turned, Kellen said the reflection of the town lights broke for a moment, and the enormous eye of the thing had settled on him. He had woken up in that very alley, Captain Jarik nowhere to be found. When Kellen had finished his tale, those in the tavern looked back to Jarik. To their horror, the old man only sat back and laughed. Some accused him of bringing doom to Stagwall's ships, but Jarik only shrugged. "You are all fools," he muttered. "The sea has always taken its share. now the only difference is that it tells me which share it wants. In a rage, the townfolk raced forward to seize him, but old Jarik fought back with shocking strength and speed. Even the several dozen patrons of the Inky Cup could not subdue him, and he fled from the building and was not seen anywhere in the harbor, though they sought him with a vengeance. All across Stagwall, notices went up, promising 8,000 talars for anyone who could help find Jarik and bring him back to face the justice of the harbor. They never found him. For that very night, Captain Jarik went down to the eastern beach, took off his shirt and shoes, and walked alone into the Mirrordeep. His clothing and his peg-leg footprints were found the next morning, letting the city know that the man had vanished without a sound from under their noses. From that day forward, sailors from Stagwall swear that on windless nights at the start of winter, when the sea grows too calm and shows the stars from another sky, something huge moves under the surface, something with a great lidless eye. And if you go to the edge of the long pier of Stagwall Harbor and listen carefully, some say you can hear a voice whispering from the water.
Send them out. The sea hungers.
Thanks for listening to one of my horror fantasy folktales, dark little legends from the world of my next novel, The Decay. These stories come from the land of Zarathis, a place of old magic, buried terrors, broken truths, and places where reality has worn thin enough for nightmares to press their fingers through. Some tales are warnings, some are fragments of history, and some are lies that have survived long enough to grow teeth of their own. As The Decay draws closer, these folk tales offer glimpses into the world behind the novel, fears, myths, and the shadows its people have learned not to name. Once again, thanks for listening, and tread carefully. In Zarathis, very few voices can be trusted.